Welcome to Canada's podcast.
Hello, I'm Mario Toneguzzi, managing editor of Canada's podcast. Today on Calgary's podcast, my guest is Carmen Morin, who is an award-winning concert pianist, educator, entrepreneur in Calgary. And thanks for joining us today, Carmen.
Thanks so much for having me, Mario. Great to be here.
All right, let me just start by asking you just a little bit, explain what you do, Carmen.
So my background is as a born and raised Calgarian, very proud to be one. I grew up in Canada's and Calgary's classical music community. So my training is as a classical pianist. And then that led me to, of course, become an educator in that same field. So I taught with the University Conservatory, and then in 2013 branched off into my own brick and mortar commercial private music school. So that's where my entrepreneurial journey really started to unfold. From there, we launched into our online programs, which we began in 2018 and then really ramped up in 2020, as so many did as well. So we've really developed a whole kind of separate entity for that digital arm of our traditional business. And then that naturally evolved also into my consulting. So now I guide other business owners, other traditional service-based service providers, and I teach them how they can do the same basically with their business. So focusing in instructional design. So a few different hats, but there's a through line in there for sure.
So when did you first start to play the piano?
So I began when I was 2 years old. And that's formal training. So I come from a musical family, and my dad continues to be a very prominent music teacher here in the city and in Canada. So it was really just a pillar of how we were raised, that formal music training. And I always am thankful for that, not only for the gift of music and being able to perform and play my instrument, but also just how many of the principles and the character traits that really developed through that discipline of formal training and that appreciation of the arts. So I started very young at the age of 2. Yes.
So what does it take, and I'm going to ask you some questions about what you just said about some of the things that you get out of doing that. But what does it take to get to the level that you got to?
And I think it's a really important conversation that I enjoy having, is that people will think, that talent, of course, is something that you are born with, right? Is a common, what I feel is a misconception. So for myself, I began playing at the age of 2, and I actually made my debut with orchestra by the time I was 10. So I was playing as soloist with orchestra, right? And when I say that, people will often kind of give a response of, wow, you must have been very talented. But when you look at actually the background of even our family, I did that for the first time when I was 10. One of my brothers did that for the first time when he was only 7 years old. And another brother did it when he was 11, right? So there are kind of some common threads where we like to see talent, and it can kind of create a disconnect that must be something that someone is born with or without. But the fact is, we were actually really training in an intentional, informal way. So in order to get these results, for ourselves, and also what we do now for our students who have had similar outcomes in our music school, it's really about that process of actively growing your skills. And it's, actively growing your skill set at the instrument, but also the way that you approach challenges, the way that you approach your practice, the role that you play in creating the outcomes that you'll achieve.
Stay ahead of the game with our expert tips and strategies that will help your business thrive in a digital era. CanadasPodcast.com. Subscribe now.
Here's a question I have asked, and I'm sure every parent out there has gone through this. How do you get a child of that age to, to spend the time to do it? Like, because obviously probably one of the last things they want to do, they want to be outside running around in the snow or whatever, right?
Give or take. I mean, so that's a very common question that we get, as you can imagine. And the response to that is that, when you think about when you're trying to develop certain qualities in your children, if you are telling them, that they need to eat a balanced nutritional diet, or they need to learn how to read, or they need to train them how to think when they learn their mathematics, all those different things. There's so many different areas that we trust in the value of them. And so we would never ask, a 5-year-old, a 7-year-old to make such long-term decisions to say, do you want to invest in daily consistent work to do this? So ultimately, the success really comes through the support of the parents. Absolutely. That it's just like any other area of their education, that you wouldn't leave it to a young child to make those decisions. but rather you would create the structure and support for them to have those results. So when you look at it in that way, that motivation becomes a little bit irrelevant. Because what we know is that motivation, there's sparks of feeling, sparks of inspiration, but ultimately motivation is not meant to carry us through to our goals. It's really that discipline and that consistency and working with the faith in how valuable the process is.
Yeah, I used to do, well, I still do a little bit of media training with a colleague of mine, and his line was always, how do you get to Carnegie Hall? Practice, practice,
Practice.
right? Yeah,
Absolutely. And I always like to say, being further down the line, having the performance experience that I have, I like to share openly. I often don't feel like practicing. It's
yeah,
just like the way that I often don't feel like going to the gym, and I often would rather eat, a red velvet cupcake than my salad, all these different things. But we
yeah,
do this because we understand the process, that it's on the other side of those experiences that we'll get those waves of results.
yeah.
Hmm.
So, throughout your musical training, what do you think you got out of that?
Hmm.
Besides obviously the skill and the talent,
Hmm.
but other qualities or other traits that you developed that helped you in life or helped you in business.
Absolutely. I mean, so many. So I like to start because often people will say, kind of, what's the main benefit of music lessons, right? And the thing is when you start to look at the many benefits of music lessons, everything from the way it impacts your cognitive development and your brain plasticity, all of the benefits there versus what it's doing for your physical body, your hormones, your sleep, all of these different things, your nervous system. But then, of course, it goes into the skill, the study habits. So there are so many different benefits to it. So ultimately, music at its essential core is our birthright as humans, right? We are all musical beings, and it's only been in the recent kind of past century that it's been trained out of us that you have to either be a formally trained musician and you're musical, or you are non-musical and you need to sit in the audience, right? So there is something at its core that developing that in yourself has so many other benefits to the ways that you can be productive in other areas. Specifically, when you think from a practical level, it's really things like cultivating those character traits and those habits that apply to everything. So when I look at how I've approached growing my business, how I branch off into other areas of business, the way that I approach my health and fitness, it really is all with this mindset of understanding how to take an end goal. So the way that you learn, okay, here's the big piece that I want to learn. And
Yeah.
I know, and I have a very clear strategy of how I can break that down, how I can apply really specific work strategies and habits to build my skills in certain areas. I
Mm.
understand the active growth when it comes to talent development, right? So when you take that, when you learn it in music lesson, there's a reason why certain schools or things like medical schools will often look on the applications. Do you have formal training in something like music? Not only has it developed all these other
Mm.
abilities because of what it's done for your cognitive skills, but they also know that you have very clear and strategic work habits that can apply in many different areas.
Yeah. What
Mhm.
is what does it take from I guess your own perspective for each individual? What does it take to get that discipline? Because you know
Mhm.
in everything, whether it's being a pianist, whether it's being an athlete,
Mhm.
I have that discipline, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Like, how do you
Yeah.
get that? Like,
So I always, again, having that environment nurtures that growth, right? So when you are in a home that values hard work, consistency, values just that, there's a faith in what you're capable of, right?
yeah,
So we like to think of like the mother tongue method in education, where if you're in a home that speaks French, your family will never question, will you also learn to speak French? Or maybe you'll learn to speak a different language, right? There's this faith that you are capable and you can achieve these things, right? So being in that type of environment is key. From there, I find it's really understanding the process of growth, that it's not just a matter of sitting down and doing something for 30 minutes every day. The
mm,
truth is about practice is that all practice is not created equal, and certain types of practice can actually make you worse at
mm,
what you're doing, right? So if you sit down and you do 30 minutes every day of poor habits and thinking negatively and not having a clear path to how you're going to improve at the end of that 30 minutes, you
Yeah.
will actually end up worse at the end of that practice session than you were when you first sat down, right? So it does go into really harnessing not only the drive that we have to improve ourselves, but then part of that teaching is being able to explain that clear path of here's what we're working on, here's how you can improve it, and here are strategies. And then it becomes a skill just like anything else. Learning how to practice is a whole other skill that you develop.
Join our thriving community of like-minded individuals who share a passion for success and innovation. CanadasPodcast.com. Subscribe now.
How long ago did you take, your skills in music and turn them into a business?
Mm-hmm.
How long ago was that journey?
So I opened my commercial school in 2013. So we just had our 10-year anniversary this past November. So that was kind of, to be honest, always in my plans. If I have to look back, I'm actually I have an interview from when I was 8 years old, and I was on my way to the national finals, and I was on. Gord Gillies was interviewing me, actually. Yeah. So at a Good Morning Calgary or Bright. Anyways, it was, and it's me at 8 years old saying, what do you want to be when you grow up? I want to be a piano teacher. And then behind the scenes, I also had all these kind of business cards I named it Carmen's Clef, and it was my music school. So it kind of was always there that was the plan. So I began teaching at the university, but I think in the back of my mind, I always knew that I had the entrepreneurial drive. And that was in the goals. And so it was the right time. So I branched off into 2013. And then we actually expanded our brick and mortar space to another bay in that complex in 2019, which was about 4 months before the world shut down, of course, for the pandemic, right? So that was learning a lot, but through the entrepreneurial journey. Yeah, but it ended up being quite a blessing, blessing. Mm-hmm.
So if you don't mind me asking, how old were you when you first started this?
How old would I have been in 2013? I would have been 29.
29.
Yes.
So as a young entrepreneur, what would you say your biggest challenge was in starting this?
I think, it's funny that when you say that, because when you're a young entrepreneur, you don't really fully know what you're getting yourself into. So it's funny when I look back, I was like, I'll be fine. I've got this, no problem. Right. Yeah. And then of course, it's not until you get into the process of, investing. I was self-funded. I am the sole owner. I didn't have a business partner. I didn't have any formal business training. I do come from a family of entrepreneurs. So I think there is that element of, again, I have that work ethic that I went in and wore all the hats. I was doing the admin, I was doing the cleaning, I was doing the, discussing with the developers about the build out. Like it was very much a solo journey. So I think getting into it, I was just so, you have that confidence that you'll just figure it out. And I have to say that I think even though I have more context and understanding of what the entrepreneurial journey entails, I think I still kind of live in that space. And I think that's why I continue to grow my business forward of that element of I can figure it out and I can build the skills that I need. And just to go back to what you asked about, the main benefit that you get from music lessons, it's that I know how to practice. If something's important to me, I know, I feel confident in my ability to build the skills that I need to get there.
Yeah. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So, looking back at those 10 years, in terms of the lessons of being an entrepreneur, what would you say to other people? What were some of the key lessons you've learned in this decade?
My number one lesson would be actually the flip side of what I just shared, which is to get your systems in process and learn to delegate sooner. Mm-hmm. Because I went in with such an ambitious and, I really value my work ethic, I did probably way more than I needed to for way longer than I needed to. Right. So, hiring things out when as soon as you can, right. Where I kind of figured I would do many more things than I needed to on my own. And then, of course, documenting those systems. So now we're in a place where, I have an amazing director of operations for the school. So I'm able to really be there as the owner and make decisions strategically, but I'm not actually in there running the business from day to day. And that's only because we've been able to really strategically plan out all of our systems, automations, all those kinds of things. So that would be the first piece of advice I'd give to a young business owner is get your systems, write them down, document them, and make it repeatable and, something that you can train and reference back to. And then, funnily enough, as I've gone through the journey, I look back at, I'm thankful that I followed my intuition in many different steps of the journey. And I think that that's something that young entrepreneurs, again, even that it kind of comes up my age at the time of opening the school. I think sometimes it comes with a connotation of like, you need advice, right? Which we all need advice and we
Yeah.
all need mentors. But ultimately, when I look back at a lot of the decisions and the pivots that I made, they were things that I was kind of advised not to do. But I did it anyways, right? So because I knew my principles and my values. So I think leaning into that, regardless of your age, don't go in and think that all of a sudden you need to consult every other expert, because you will know if you're really thinking strategically.
So you follow your gut a lot.
I've learned to follow. I've followed my gut a lot, and I've learned to stop questioning my gut because my gut is proving to be pretty darn reliable. Yeah. So start owning that a little bit, that, I kind of knew that. Why am I asking all this advice when I don't need it? Right. Yeah.
So how difficult, is it, especially for young entrepreneurs to, as you said, to let go and delegate and have others do certain things because, the business is like your baby, right? I know for myself, if I owned a restaurant or a bar or something like that, I almost want to be there like almost every hour of every day, right?
Yeah.
So how difficult is it to
Sure.
let go a little bit?
For sure. And I mean, a couple things on that point. So first of all, it is still my baby. Right. And it's
Yeah.
one of those things where it's like, if you think about baby, because I also have children, right? If you think about your babies, it's
Yeah.
that when they are in the early stage, you need to be there. You need to be there doing everything. And you need to be making those decisions about what path, what school do I want to put them in? Should they learn an instrument? Should they learn another language? All these things that you make those decisions. But then a big step of that is that when they become, a toddler business, and, a early childhood business and a teenage business. And then now I'm kind of moving into the stage where, whether it's a fully adult business, I'm still there involved, but it's kind of in its teenage stage of like, okay, you're 10 years old, your revenue's healthy, your growth has been healthy. We've got a steady, stable base, and, that it's actually healthier if I do learn to step out. And in that way, it's really forced us to build out those systems and really think strategically. I mean, the reality is that the majority of small business owners, I feel like it does have to be a strategic decision to take those steps. The reality is that many businesses, even 10 years into the journey, either don't have the margins or the revenue enough that they can bring people in to support stepping out, or they haven't built out the system, so they're really just kind of drowning in those tasks, right?
Yeah.
So it's not an easy, it doesn't happen naturally. I think you really have to make it a priority that, hey, we need to make systems, we need to carve out the time to plan out these systems and really make sure that they're in line with what we want.
Yeah. Now, obviously, being an entrepreneur is very busy at life. You mentioned your children, you're very busy there too. What do you do for yourself? Like, to relax or just enjoy
Yeah,
time?
I do lots. And I, again, feel fortunate that I've been really cognizant of prioritizing that. So I work in a few different niches, as I mentioned at the beginning of this call, between the brick and mortar and the online business and the consulting business. But I am very intentional about how I move in between those two. So I do very focused, deep work chunks throughout the day. So I'll do kind of 3 or 4 hours of deep work where I'm creating content programs, all those different things, and then balance it out with tasks and responding to my team and helping them to make decisions from a high level, all those things. But then I balance it out. I prioritize sleep very, very much. So I have an Aura ring that I track. And if my friends will know that I'm very, value my high scores in sleep and rest. So I do believe in the value of, we're more productive and far more creative when we make sure to give ourselves that rest. And then I also really value switching into different areas of challenge. So I have challenged myself in fitness. I like to learn new skills, like I'm learning how to knit right now, right?
Wow.
I read quite a bit. And then spend time with my partner and my family. So I do feel like it's taken a while to get there, but I see how much more productive I am when I pour those things back in.
With over 700 episodes and 500 news articles, we are your go-to source for all things entrepreneurship. CanadasPodcast.com. Subscribe now.
And, maybe talk a little bit about this, but that work-life balance, I hate to use that because
Mhm.
a cliche-ish term, but
Yeah,
it's really important, isn't it? That like how many entrepreneurs do you see out there that burn themselves out because that's
100%.
all they do is
Yeah.
24/7 their business, right? So you got to find
Mhm.
that balance, don't you?
100%. And it's interesting because when that term comes out of balance, I always seem to, I mean, just from my training, I think of it from a musical standpoint. So in music, the word balance is, when you're hearing a big group of people, an orchestra performing, or if I'm playing on the piano, and there are many different things that you can be hearing. For me to balance that is that I can really control what's coming out as the forefront and the melody, what's in the supporting supporting role, right? So that balance is not about finding equal symmetry, that I do the exact same amount of time in my personal life as I do in my work life. It's really about, moving through those cycles. So when I started my brick and mortar business, yeah, that did come out as the forefront of I was going all in on my time. But now that I've been able to grow that business, I'm still owner of that business and it's running successfully and I'm still strategically growing it, but it doesn't take that same amount of my time, right? Because I've built it. So then therefore something else can come into the forefront. So I think it's a matter of recognizing that it's a something that will have flow to it. And that it's not about keeping things in symmetry. It's about managing that energy and managing your priorities with what your objectives are at the time.
Okay. So I imagine, with all the music lessons that you do you still find time just to play?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And you know what? It's funny because when I don't find the time enough, I feel it. I feel it in like,
Good.
it's like you're in your body because like even sitting here at a computer is very different than the movement that you feel at the piano. In your nervous system, I notice it in my sleep if I'm not playing, right? So absolutely. It's something that, of course, it's ebbed and flowed. When I first opened my school, I always find it amazing. Like I went over a year without playing the piano at all because I was just so busy, right? So I would play and demonstrate in lessons, but like for my own playing, it is something that just, it's the reality of it. There wasn't time. But similar to what we talked about before, that I can see that I'm more productive. I come up with more ideas. I come up with more solutions if I take time to pursue that art.
Okay. Now I
Mhm.
know obviously that certain genre of music, but did you ever just want to just kick back and just play some like Crocodile Rock or some Jerry Lee Lewis?
Totally, totally. You know what? So something that I feel fortunate of is, my dad was our first teacher, was my first teacher, and we grew up in a home of all this classical training. But he listened to every style of music. So we listened from
Yeah.
everything from Stevie Ray Vaughan to Tom Waits to
Wow.
Jerry Lee Lewis to classical music to
Yeah.
jazz. So it's kind of I absolutely have not felt. I've not felt that it's required that I stay in a certain genre, but there is, the complexity that comes with these rich pieces of music, works of art, and not just from history, but contemporary composers. That complexity there's so much richness there that when you are able to kind of experience that to that high level, there's so much value in
Yeah.
that. Yeah, that I enjoy.
The last thing I just wanted to ask you, Carmen, is I've had these discussions over the last, I don't know, couple of years with different friends of mine about music, right? And
Hmm.
we've lived through some difficult times. You know,
Yes,
we've lived through the COVID, we've lived through some economic challenges, etc. But one constant that the friends of mine have always talked about is music and how
absolutely,
music is good for the soul.
absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, the fact that you have it, it's at the root of just us being human. And there's so many different ways that you can say it. And it kind of feels like, oh, is it sounding cliche? But truly, there's not a single society in all of history, in all of culture, and pardon me, of all of history, every culture has had music at its core. And I think it's one of those things that becomes so rooted in who we are that we can take it for granted from time to time, right? But if you move through the world just observing how much music impacts everything, it's really hard to deny. I think, in today's age, it can be tempting. We have to, find the logical reason, the practical reason why music is valuable, right? And there is a long list of those. Everything from, what it does to your body and your mind to also the skills that, as we move forward in this, AI revolution, where so many roles that were previously valued as the practical roles you can see how much they'll be absorbed by technology, right? And ultimately those aspects of us being human, the art form, the creative thinking, the thinking in many different perspectives, that is going to become more and more of a premium, right? So I think that's coming kind of full circle to what we've already known. Right.
All right. Wonderful. Well, thanks so much, Carmen, for joining us today.
My pleasure. Thanks so much for having me.
All right. That was Carmen Morin, who is an award-winning concert pianist, educator, and entrepreneur in Calgary. I'm Mario Toneguzzi, managing editor of Canada's podcast, today with Calgary's podcast. Thanks for joining us.